Hey everybody, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a sound manager in Unity. And I'm going to go ahead and use a sound package that I already created, which should be on the CS381 website with naval audio and whatnot. But if you do want to get your own audio, you could actually use freesound.org and find all sorts of sound effects that work best for your game. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump into the base of assignment 5. Okay. And now that I'm here, you can see that we have a ship and or two ships, and we have the ocean. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is go ahead and import that audio. So I'm going to click on import custom package and use this audio. And you can see here the audio I'm using, I categorize it into these 4 sections. So I have like ambient noises, I have idle sounds, I have music, and then I have selection sounds. So I'm just going to go ahead and import this whole package. And if you were to download your own music from freesound.org, you could just drag the MP3 files directly into folders inside your assets. Okay, and now that our audio is here, we can see that all those folders are there. So the first thing I'm going to show is how to make ambient music into your game. So to do that, let's go ahead and look at the ambient sound. This is the MP3 file, and um, it just shows you like all the properties if you select the MP3 file inside Unity. But we need to make a audio source onto a game object to play this ambient sound. Actually, rather than using ambient, I'm gonna go ahead and start off with music, because music is more like audio that you could hear from anywhere within the game, and I think this would be a better example to start out with. So yeah, I'm gonna start off with music, and we need to create a sound source. So you want to find a good place to put a sound source that could be heard anywhere. And since later on in this video I'm going to be making a sound manager, I think that's just the most appropriate place for that. So I'm going to create an empty game object under managers, and I'm going to call it sound mgr. And then I'm going to add a component to it, and that component's going to be called audio source of type audio source. And you can see it has quite a few parameters, and there's like 3D sound settings. So we could ignore the 3D sound settings for now. But the first most important parameter is this one, which is audio clip. And let's just go ahead and drag in one of our audio files into that audio clip. And the next most important property is whether we're playing on awake or not. And so usually when we jump into a game, we want the audio to just start off like right away. So I'm going to let it play on awake, and then I want it to loop. So these audio files are actually music loops, and once it hits the end, then it could start back from the beginning, and it will sound pretty seamless. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and use that. And let me select my sound manager. So that's good. That's good. And then the third, probably most important thing is spatial blend. So I'll cover this in the next example, but just understand this is a pretty important thing to adjust. So now, if I actually just jump into my game by pushing play, we can hear audio. And we can locate our camera anywhere in the world, and the audio will sound exactly the same. The audio like volume will sound exactly the same. So now if you're wondering how can I make audio that will be relative to distance between your camera, we can simply do that by going down to our movable entities. And I'm going to select the DDG51, and I'm going to also create a sound source in here. And then just like I did before, I'm going to add an audio clip, and I'm going to go under to the the idle sounds. And I have an idle sound here called large vessel engine. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to the audio source inside the DDG51. And then I want it to play on awake, and I want it to loop, but I want it to only be relative to the distance of my camera. I want the volume to be relative to the distance of my camera. So I'm going to change the spatial blend from 2D to 3D. And now distance is being calculated. And if we actually look under the 3D sound settings, you can see that this y-axis is our volume, and this axis is our distance. And we could fine tune all these parameters. So say I want the max distance to be something like 100. Then you can see in scene, now there's like a blue sphere around the DDG51 that represents that distance. And there's also a min distance too. Yeah, so we could change that as well. So we could say if we're like within 50 meters from the ship, then we can hear the volume at 100%. So yeah, let's do that. And then for max distance, I think I'm actually going to increase this a little bit larger. So now it's 200. We can see this, maybe 150. Now we can see this outer sphere is a bit further out. So once my camera approaches the ship and it hits this point, this is when the audio will start increasing. All right, and rather than using a logarithmic roll-off, so logarithmic roll-off makes the audio change with this kind of slope right here. So I usually prefer linear roll-off, and this way I can start from 0 and then I could increase up to 1, and it's just a pretty smooth transition relative to distance. So I like to use linear roll-off. Now let's go ahead and hop into the game and see what this sounds like. I realize that the game sound might be a little hard to hear the other sound, so I'm just going to disable the sound source from the sound manager with the music. So now, yeah, let's go ahead and play again. And so at this position where the camera is located, I can't quite hear the audio from the DDG51, but you can see if I get a little closer, you can kind of hear the audio. If I get even closer, you can hear it more and more and more and more, all the way until I get to that 100% volume zone. So yeah, that's audio with distance. Now I want to show how to make an audio manager. So we can do that by creating something called an audio mixer. And so an audio mixer enables you to control like broadly a lot of the audio sources around your game. So this audio mixer, I'm going to go ahead and name this just audio mixer. And this will have like master controls for all the audio within the game. So now if you create that and then you double click on the audio mixer, you'll see it brings up a mixer window like this. And I'm actually going to bring it over here. Okay, so the mixer window has mixers, snapshots, groups, and views. But the most important thing we want to focus on is groups. And I'm actually going to go ahead and delete some of these other mixers. A car, a jet plane, a propeller plane, which came with the default Unity assets. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these because we don't really need them at the moment. Okay, so the one group we have right now is the master. So this will enable us to control the master volume all around the game. And we can actually see if we push this plus sign under groups, we could create a new subgroup. And let's call this subgroup, or let's actually create subgroups relative to the folders that we have here. So I'm going to create this group call it ambient. I'm going to create this group. Oops. So if you want to create a subgroup under master, you just select master again, and then click the plus sign. And then I'm going to call this one music. I'm going to select master and add a new group, and I'm going to call this idle. Then I'm going to create a new subgroup by selecting master and adding a new one. I'm going to call this one selection. Okay, and now we can categorize our audio within our game under these groups, and then we can control our master audio under master. So let's go ahead and look at the sound manager, and let's look at our audio source for the music. And it has an output right here, which is asking for an audio mixer group. So let's just go ahead and associate our music with the music. And probably the best way to assign that is by clicking this this button to the right of the selection area, and it'll bring up all the different groups within your game right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and select music. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the DDG51 audio source. So I'm just going to click that button and then add the output group for idle. Okay. So now I'm just going to go ahead and run my game. And we can see here, let me actually turn down the audio a little bit. Actually, I could control that within here. Okay, so we can see when we're running the game, you can notice like all the idle, all the audio tracks running at the same time. So here you could essentially be like a DJ, and you can add effects, and you could adjust the volumes, and this is really great for controlling the sound around your game. So you can see if I get closer to the DDG51 that the idle sound is now playing a bit more louder, and it shows you the decibel ratings for all these audio sound sources. So at this point, I want to now be able to control these volumes through a script, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and create a new script and call it Sound Manager. And I'm going to go ahead and open that up in Visual Studio. Okay, now in Visual Studio, let's just go ahead and delete, we don't need the start anymore, but we'll use the update function. So let's go ahead and create some variables. And the first variable, I'm going to name this one private float threshold volume. And I'm going to assign this to -80F for float. And so what threshold volume is this is our max decibel, or our minimum decibel rating within our game. And you can actually find this value within your audio mixer. So if I look at if I just select the audio mixer here, you can see that one of the properties is threshold volume, and when it's at its minimum, it's at -80 decibels. So that's the threshold volume I'm referencing. So now, let's go ahead and add some other variables. So I'm going to create a float for master volume. I'm going to create a public float for all the other subcategories. So we have ambient volume, we have idle volume, we have music volume, and then we have effects volume. Okay, so now if I go ahead and save, and then I go back into Unity, let's attach our Sound Manager script to the Sound Manager game object. And we can see we have all these float values that we could adjust right here. But I actually want to limit my audio volume floats from 0 to 1 because usually I'm not changing my audio to like 200% or like 300% or like above 100%. So back inside Visual Studio, we could actually do this by using range, and you put it inside these brackets, which enable you to change this float into a slider, essentially. So I'm going to type 0 and 1 for the range, and I'm also going to use F just to be clear that it's a float. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these. And if I save my file and go back into Unity, then we can see that all these update to sliders that can be adjusted from 0 to 1. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make it so we can access properties of each of these audio groups. And by default, you can't actually access any of the properties of these audio groups. So what you have to do is you actually have to select an audio group, and I'm going to start off with master. And when you have that selected, then you can see under the properties, there's a attenuation property and volume. So if you right click on volume, you can see that there's an option here that says expose volume of master to script. So now I click on that, and then you can see here under the audio mixer tab that there's some exposed parameters. And those exposed parameters enable you to modify the state of these audio mixers in runtime. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this first parameter to master. Actually, let's name it even better. Master volume, or VOL for volume. Okay, so now I have a parameter that I can modify. So let's go back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to create a another variable to access the mixer. Public audio mixer audio mixer. And you can see that it doesn't know what the class audio mixer is, and that's because we need to include it. So I'm going to type using Unity engine.audio, and then now it knows what audio mixer is. So before we go any further, let me just make sure that I add that audio mixer to this script. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag the audio mixer into that audio mixer field. And then now I'm referencing this mixer with these groups and these exposed properties. So back inside the script, I'm going to create some, I'm going to create a helper function actually. I'm just going to create one, and I'm going to call this set volume. And the first property is going to be a string, which is going to be the exposed parameter type. And then the next parameter is going to be some float value for the volume. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and access the audio mixer, and then we're going to use this function that they give us, which is called setFloat. And the first property is going to be we want to access whatever the exposed parameter is. So I'm just going to pass that in right there. And then the second property is going to be the new value of the volume, essentially. So to set this properly, we actually have to reference our threshold volume. So we're going to do threshold volume, and then we're just going to scale it in between 0 and 1. So you could just multiply it by whatever value is passed in. Okay. So, oh, whoops, that's value. Value. And end your line. So, this is great and all, but it's backwards. And I'll show you what I mean by backwards by running it. But let me just finish the update, and then we can see what it looks like. So now within the update function, all we have to do is set volume, and we have to do that for each one of these properties. So I'm going to set the volume for master, which is the expose property parameter master VOL. So I'm going to type it exactly like that. So master VOL, master VOL, and then the value is going to be whatever value our master volume is, just like that. Okay, so now let's jump back into Unity and see what that looks like. Okay, so now you can see if I select the sound manager and I click on master volume, or if I don't click on it, but if I drag the slider, I could actually adjust the volume. And it is directly represented within the audio mixer here. So that's how you adjust volume within a script. But now say I want to fine tune this. So it's like not right now. So like if I have it at 1, I usually want that to be 100% volume. And if it's at 0, then that's like no volume. So it's backwards right now. And to fix that, all you have to do inside Visual Studio is just take this value and subtract it by 1, or 1 minus that value. So now you basically flip that value 0 to 1, 1 to 0. Now, back inside Unity. Oh, did I save? Oh yeah, I didn't save my file. Okay. Save my file. Now back inside Unity. The master volume scales from 0 to 1 properly. So now you could do that for all the other audio tracks, or the audio groups, but I'm not going to go ahead and set those up in this tutorial. I'm just going to leave that up to you. The process is exactly the same as what I showed. So now the last thing I'm going to show is how you can fire audio in runtime when a special like action happens. So our movable entities, we want them to play some sort of selection sound when they're selected. So for the tugboat, I'm gonna go ahead and add a audio source, and this audio source is gonna look at the selection sound. It's gonna reference the selection sound. So let's go ahead and drag the naval radio chatter into the audio clip. And then the output group is going to be selection. And then I don't actually want this to play on awake. I actually want it to play by script. And I don't want it to loop. And in terms of spatial blend, I want to hear this audio anywhere. So no matter what my camera location is, I want to be able to hear that audio properly. So that's fine if you leave it at 2D, and then all the other parameters should be fine. So now we need to find a script that we can play this audio source when we select the entity. So I think the most appropriate place for that is from the selection manager. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the selection manager script. Okay, and then let's see, we have the selected next entity function, select next entity function, and once we get our selected entity, we're going to want to also fire a sound. So I'm going to type selected entity dot selection sound play. So it says we don't have an associated selection sound. So let's go ahead and make that association. So if I click on the entity 381, we can see that we can add a value that doesn't change under values that do not change. I'm going to call this public audio source selection sound. Okay. So now back inside Unity, we just need to make sure that we add we need to associate the selection sound with that sound, and I'm going to select the tugboat. So I'm just going to drag this up here. Selection sound, just like that. Okay, so now the selection sound is associated, and if I go back to the selection manager, we can see that all our red lines went away because now selection sound is a valid property that we could access. And all the audio sources have this method play. So they have play, they have stop, so we can cut off our audio at certain points. So yeah, let's just go ahead and play. And another thing I want to do is actually, I just want to make sure that the audio source isn't already playing. But I'll just demo it before I actually write that code to see why we're actually doing that. So back inside Unity, I'm going to go ahead and play. And let's just make sure that within our sound manager that the effects volume is 100%. Okay, so now if I go and press tab, we should hear some audio on this ship, or from any location really, but from this ship. Oh, okay, so our master volume is at 0, so we just need to make sure that our master volume is exactly where we want it. I'm gonna turn, oh, actually. Okay, I'm gonna turn the music down, but I'm gonna have the master volume up. And then now if I tab select,
General quarters, long hands, main battle stations.
we can hear that an audio played from this ship by script. Okay, so that's how you create a sound manager within Unity, and that's how you can access sounds from scripts. And this is how you can control audio sources from all around within your game. And if you want to take this a step further, then you could also create UI elements that actually access the sound manager, and then you can globally play sound through a UI manager, or adjust your audio levels through a UI. And one other thing I forgot to mention is within the sound manager, if we want to access this from anywhere within the game, you can go ahead and type in public public sound mgr instance, and then when we awake, public awake or private awake, we want to set this instance equal to this, and this is actually going to be static. So now from any script we can actually access this instance of the sound manager and modify the volume levels if we want. Okay, and the very last thing I want to talk about is audio limits. So Unity Editor already kind of has a sound manager behind the scenes, which focuses on managing your CPU performance with the sounds that are playing within your game. So if we actually go ahead and click on Edit and Project Settings, we can see that there's an audio tab, and one of the options here is our max real voices. And so this is the number of real audio sources we can hear simultaneously playing at the same time. So yeah, 32 is that number, but you can increase it or decrease it depending on your CPU requirements and how your game is running. And we have something here called virtual voices, which is an optimized way of playing sounds. And it says here the maximum number of sounds managed by the system, even though the real voice count of the loudest sounds will be physically playing. So yeah, this basically limits the amount of tracking of audio sources that Unity does. So the reason why I point this out is sometimes you'll have like you'll have like lots of birds or something flying through your game, and they'll all be chirping, and it may exceed this limit, and you'll start seeing warnings within your console. And so if you ever need to adjust the parameters of the number of audio sources, then you could do that within these settings. All right, so that concludes the tutorial. Hopefully this was helpful. Good luck with your sound managing.